you're familiar with the good work of our diversity and inclusion department, particularly as they seek to expand opportunities for small and underrepresented businesses in our community. So you'll be glad to know that their good work is being recognized by folks beyond city government and beyond Fort Worth. Just last month, the National Association of Minority Contractors, Dallas-Fort Worth chapter, presented its Golden Shovel Champion Award to Diversity and Inclusion Director Christina Brooks. As you can see in their own words, they're recognizing an innovative diversity, equity, and inclusion leader whose passion and dedication blazed the trail for the creation of robust supplier diversity processes and effective changes throughout her organization and community. So that's a big award going to Christina on behalf of the Diversity and Inclusion Department. And just last month, the Dallas-Fort Worth Minority Supplier Development Council presented Fort Worth with 2 awards. First, we're recognized as one of 18 entities demonstrating best practices, innovation, and quantitative results. And you can see from that graphic the company of outstanding corporations in the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area with which we're associated in that recognition. Also at that same event, the City of Fort Worth was recognized as Public Sector Entity of the Year for excellence in minority business inclusion and utilization. And that award goes to the Diversity and Inclusion Department. So I wanted to commend Christina Brooks on behalf of Diversity and Inclusion. She's brought folks from her staff to join us this afternoon. I'd like for Christina, if she would, to step forward and say a word. Christina Brooks.
Good afternoon, Council, Mayor, City Manager Cook. A lot of the work that we do sometimes happens through email and phone calls, and over the last couple of years, WebEx. And so as you're recognizing some of the awards that our department has garnered on behalf of the City of Fort Worth and the people in this community, I thought it was absolutely important to make sure that you were able to put faces to the work that's being done every day, sometimes for very long hours. And I wanted to bring each and every person in our department, at least those that are not sick right now, up to share in this recognition, and they are here. So, Gwen Wilson, Assistant Director for the Business Equity Division. Gian Vendel, Business Equity Division. Nancy Wong, Business Equity Division. Tim Hayden, Civil Rights Enforcement. Rosalba is a part, and I don't want to mess up your last name, Rosalba. Zamagay, and I always say it wrong. Zamagay, Business Equity Division. Remy Lee, Business Equity Division. Shamika Kennedy is Administration. Maricela is in Civil Rights Enforcement / Administration. Al Henderson is our ADA Coordinator in Civil Rights Enforcement. Angie Rush, Assistant Director for Civil Rights Enforcement. and Lori Maniotis, Civil Rights Enforcement. So it is with great honor that I represent each and every one of these people and accept the awards on their behalf and the people of the community. Thank you.
Now I'm going to call on Christina to make other recognitions.
All right. In 2022, 3 cohorts embarked on a journey of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, or IDEA. Together, city staff from almost all city departments explored foundational IDEA principles through history, municipal service delivery, and most importantly, self-discovery. Challenging each other to innovate new problem-solving techniques and design a solutions-based approach to individual, departmental, and community equity. Participants completed 8 hours of in-person classwork and 2 hours minimum towards a capstone project of their choosing that was approved by their department head. Together, participants completed a total of 10 credit hours to achieve the IDEA certification associate level. The following City of Fort Worth staff met or exceeded the requirements for graduation. Please step forward as I call your name for council and community recognition. Selena Alla, City Manager's Office, Capstone Project Title, Next Gen Youth Career Development Program. Rebecca Doyle, Parks and Recreation Department, City of Fort Worth, Young Professionals Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee. Nita Franklin, Information Technology Solutions, Capstone Project Title, All Aboard Diversity and Dialogue in Teams. Andrew Goodman, Development Services Department, Capstone Project Title, City of Fort Worth Young Professionals Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee. Christine Hernandez, Human Resources, Capstone Project Title, Next Gen Youth Career Development Program. Tanya Trevelyan, Fire Department, Capstone Project Title, Women's Struggles in the Fire Industries, a white paper. Sonia Singleton, who is not here with us, I believe. Oh, she is here, okay. Neighborhood Services, Capstone Project Title, Next Gen Youth Career Development Program. And James Turner, who is returning after 8 months of being retired from the Parks and Recreation Department, Capstone Project Title, Succession Plan Report. I would also like to recognize 3 staff members who were instrumental in the creation, implementation of the Next Gen Youth Career Development Program, who aren't graduating yet, but were very instrumental in that implementation. Monique Hill, Uriel Huerta Silva, Jessica Cochran. The expected outcomes of all capstones is to positively impact a unit, a division, a department, or a citywide organization through the application of equity principles. In our inaugural year, 1 capstone project achieved the status of positive citywide impact immediately. For excellence in capstone project for all 2022 cohorts, I would like to recognize Next Gen Youth Career Development Program team members as our first awardees. You can go ahead and clap. They include Selena Alla, Christine Hernandez, Sonia Singleton, Monique Hill, Yuria Huerta Silva, and Jessica Cochran. Thank you.
Congratulations, y'all. Thank you for all your hard work.
And now I'll call on Valerie Washington to make an introduction.
City Manager, thank you. Mayor and Council, I'm going to call up Ken Simpson, our MedStar CEO, and he is bringing up Dr. Jarvis, who is our new system medical director. And a little history before they get started. Back in 1988, the city of Fort Worth formed an ambulance authority. In 1998, we did our first interlocal agreement that included participants from other member cities to do an interlocal agreement with MedStar. There are currently 15 member cities in our interlocal agreement. City of Fort Worth has board appointees to that board, and the medical director that Ken's going to introduce serves as the medical director for our entire system. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Val. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As Val said, I'm Ken Simpson. I'm the CEO for MedStar. Dr. Vithlani, our previous medical director, moved to California to be closer to his family. So our Councilman Flores and Chief Davis and the rest of the MedStar board conducted a national search to look for his replacement. After a multi-step process, they selected Dr. Jeff Jarvis. He is from here in Texas. He's been involved in EMS for the last 34 years. He is still a paramedic as he went back to medical school. And he is a proud Texas Aggie as well. And so we are very excited to welcome him to the system where he'll be overseeing not just the MedStar paramedics and EMTs, but also paramedics and EMTs from the various fire departments and first response organizations. And so just wanted to give an opportunity to introduce him, and I'll let him say a few words.
Howdy, y'all. I believe in keeping things brief, so it is a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to working with y'all and serving our community.
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. Congratulations. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks.
All right, now we'll turn to informal reports, and we have a few. So, the first informal report is on the adoption of the city's federal legislative agenda. TJ is available if there are any questions.
Any
I don't
questions?
have any questions. I just want to thanks to TJ and staff for shepherding that and getting it through. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Next informal report is the September 2022 sales tax update, and Richard Zavala is available if there are any questions. We're rolling. Third informal report is an amendment to a tax abatement agreement with Raider Express, and Robert Stearns is available if there are any questions.
I think Elizabeth has a question.
Hello, thank you. Do you know when you'll have the number of the employment performance for us on this particular one? In the IR, it says development staff is currently reviewing the reported 2021 employment performance.
Yeah, we're still going through those reports. We don't have those final numbers yet.
Okay. Do you know when you'll have them?
I can check with staff and get an ETA on that.
Okay, thank you. And then if you want to just wait, because I have the next.
Stay right there. The next informal report is the extension of the employment completion deadline for Smart Action LLC Chapter 380 agreement.
Can you tell us how close they got to the 66 full-time jobs?
Yes. I believe they were about, if I remember correctly, they were about 10 or 15, I think they were 15 jobs short of the 66 jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next informal report is on the competitive grants for the arts program, and Eric Flatiger is available if there are any questions.
Questions from council?
All right. The next informal report is a follow-up to a previous informal report related to the curfew ordinance for minors. And Judge Danny Rogers is available if there are any questions.
Questions?
Well, we have a stand-in here. There we go.
Appreciate you.
William Rumley, Court Director, and Simone Gonzalez, Deputy Chief Judge.
How are y'all? Thank you. So my first question is, and this is just lack of knowledge on my part, what happens if the the minor is in a position where they don't have access to a parent, guardian, or other custodian? Is there a provision in the law that would allow them to appear for us to otherwise dispose of this citation if they were in a place where that wasn't part of their life?
The only thing I can say is that have a next of kin family member to come in with them. But the best way would be to legally to come in through the guardian or parent. But I'm not seeing that, but I think the best way would be to come in with a immediate family member.
Right, I get that, but that's my concern, is that for some youth out there, that's not an option. I had the privilege of representing a certain section of the youth population before I was here on council. So I've seen firsthand that there are some minors under 17 that are living in a situation where that's simply not available to them. And I don't want to see their future hung up because of that. And so what can we do in those situations to help remedy that?
Let me research that for you and bring you an answer.
Okay, I appreciate that, thank you. And then I appreciate the deeper dive y'all did into the data. My concern is for those non-appearances, like, it looks like we're about half for when we look at the non-appearances to the no plea open ratio. So in 2020, there's 34 open, 32 are in the non-appearance column. Likewise, in 2021, there's 12 no plea and then 12 for the non-appearance. And so what do we do in the instances of non-appearance? I know that we don't issue a warrant, but what happens to that citation?
Right, so Councilmember Beck, what we do is we do due diligence, as you saw in the letter, to try to locate them and work to find them. You know, because we don't, you know, issue warrants or even do something where we would summons or try to bring them in. We just continue to try to reach out to them. But as stated in the document, that we don't report these to the state, so there's no impact. Should be no impact. There's not a state reporting requirement. We don't issue warrants. So really what we try to do is just get them in to resolve the citation. But there is a point in time where after a case, so we have a 7-year clause where we would administratively close if there's no action on a case for at least 2 years and it's 7 years old. But also we do work closely with the legal department to review cases that are older to see you know, what options we might move forward with.
Okay. What can we do to resolve these cases sooner?
Okay.
I mean, I read the IR and I understand that you've got certain juvenile dockets, but I think with these and with all juvenile cases, we want to make sure that we get those cleared up as soon as possible, because particularly for those that we know pending military applications or college applications are kind of hanging in the balance of those. And so I'd like for y'all to just brainstorm on how we can expedite that process for our minors going through our municipal court system, so that we set a goal, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, but we set that goal so that we remedy those as quickly as possible, so that we don't inhibit anyone's future.
Absolutely, Your Honor. We do look at these consistently, and we continue to work to find ways, just obviously not only juveniles, anybody that has a case filed with us, related to try and get those cases disposed. That's the point of the court, is a location for those, a neutral location for those violations to be disposed. So we continue to do, to look into cases, and we use the resources we have, not only within our department, but other departments, in order to get information. And again, the point of the court is to bring folks before a judge in order to resolve those. So we'll continue to work for that and bring you updates as to the things that we're doing, innovative and that type of thing that are out there. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. The next informal report is on the Fort Worth Tarrant County Innovation Partnership, and Carlo Capua is available if there are any questions. The next informal report is about firearms taken in application of the Violent Crime Strategy, and Assistant Chief Robert Aldridge is available if there are any questions.
Mayor, council? Yes, ma'am.
Does the number that you gave us here, that doesn't include the buyback, right? Like this?
No,
is-
it does not.
Okay, that was my only question. That was easy.
I think we'll just have him
I think I'll just stand here.
there.
Yeah.
There we go.
questions.
He's got the next few here. The next informal report is on mental health training provided for all Fort Worth police officers. Questions?
Questions. Since the change in April of 2022, the last sentence here says that you'll use the old lesson plan to continue training the officers. Is that all officers will continue to get that in the academy the way that it was before?
Yeah, so regular basic peace officers with the BPOC, the basic peace officer course, they get 40 hours of CIT training. The advanced CIT training is the training that Lieutenant Gorey is going to put together that's going to model the MHOT training.
Okay, and that'll be given in the academy?
That will be given post-academy, after the fact.
Okay, but what, was it previously given? I guess maybe
No,
that's
that was given, the
That's
MHOT
extra.
training was given after they had graduated the academy.
Gotcha. And then the additional training that y'all have listed here, the mental health first aid, the youth mental health, the listen, learn, lead, are those all required trainings or are they optional?
They're optional, they're not required.
Is there any discussion on making some of these not optional?
No, we're open to the discussion for sure.
I think it would probably behoove most folks to go through the PTSD for law enforcement.
Sure.
16 hours, but I think it'd probably be really important, or the youth mental health, or the mental health first aid. So, yes.
My question, Chief, was about, do other departments or does the city of Fort Worth consider stipends for employees, police officers that do achieve a certain level of training, especially in a really tough space like this one?
So another IR that's down the line, yes, there are stipends associated with that. Some of these courses help you achieve different certifications of peace officer. So this course in and of itself, not necessarily for an additional stipend, but it helps build towards the other
Okay.
stipends that are available.
Okay. Any other questions for that one?
Chief, we'll let you stay there again.
Thank you.
The next informal report is on police and fire department internal and external boards.
Any questions?
Okay.
Elizabeth?
Actually, just a comment, and this is both for PD and for fire. I appreciate you putting this together. The reason that I asked for you to do this was because I had a sneaking suspicion that maybe this was the case. There's been a lot of discussion from both departments about diversifying what y'all look like, whether that be minority representation or female representation. But what I didn't see in this list of formal or informal boards from either department is some intentional subcommittees or, informal committees where you're bringing members of those, the populations that we're targeting for recruitment or retention to really get a sense of what their unique issues and needs are in the departments. And so I would like to see that specifically when it comes to, our female recruitment and retention. And I know that I saw Chief Swearingen in the back, and she is great, and I think that there is probably nothing that she can't do, but I also don't think it's fair when we use, a single person that's in a command staff to be the voice for all, X group of people. And so I'd like to see some more intention for both our PD and fire put on that.
So I will say with Assistant Chief Swearingen's Be the Change, yes, she is one person, but she actually works with many other members of the department that are diverse, female, male, it's irrelevant, to try and get their perspective and recruiting efforts in different locations. I know that she works tirelessly, not only doing that, but she also does a lot of intentional recruiting by reaching out to the applicants that, apply to be police officers.
She does a great job. And
She does.
I think that both, I'm looking at you, Chief Davis, back there in the back too, that we could do better at making sure we're just talking and dialoguing and really understanding what those barriers to either entry or promotion are. Thank you.
I'd still stay there.
Yes, sir.
All right. The next one is on priority of responses to 911 calls about threats of violence at child care facilities and schools.
I don't have a question, I just more like comment. I think I was I know this was a very difficult situation that could have gone a lot of ways. And so I just want to thank the department for taking it so seriously and the council members that called to action. Thank you for cooperation with Child Care Associates, but our other smaller providers. I think this is the right response, and I hope that they feel the same, and other council members may have more particular questions, but just wanted to say thank you. Go ahead, Jared.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I echo that. Thank you for, taking one, preparing this report, but two, for taking steps with CCA to see how we can improve kind of the response. For folks watching and for folks at this table who may not be aware, can you just kind of give a brief of kind of the context that happened with
Absolutely.
the situation, but also, I think, forward-looking, kind of talking about what this does in response to, something that could have been, way worse.
Absolutely. So what kind of precipitated this was there was a call at a child care center. There were multiple calls actually from that child care center. The call got put into the queue, was put on hold for over 2 hours before we responded. Fortunately for us, whenever we did respond, the lady had left the resident or the premises. But nonetheless, we noticed quite a few gaps in our response and quite a few gaps in some of the things that we did, our service that we provided our citizens. And from that, we met, we had a sit-down meeting with Councilman Williams, the Child Care Center employees, but at least the leaders of that group. They said that some of their employees were very apprehensive to come back to work. So in our CAD system, we have the ability to put some addresses in there that are what we call sensitive addresses. So if a call goes out near a school, near a location, it pops up on the MDC so the officers are aware, at least in that area, there is a school that's located nearby. That's something that we changed for some of these child care facilities, is that we're able to put some of those addresses in there as well. Another gap in coverage that we had is that we do have a policy in place that for certain calls, they're supposed to be dispatched in a certain amount of time, and if people aren't available, we dispatch whoever's available no matter where they're at in the city. Unfortunately, that policy wasn't being followed in the dispatch center, which has now been reinforced. There's also another fail-safe that if a priority 2 call goes over a certain amount of time, the supervisor is notified every 5 minutes that that call is still holding and that we need to get somebody there. So, I mean, some of the gaps that we identified in this were not gaps in necessarily policy, but following said policy to make sure that these calls get out there. And one of the last things is that I know that at the state level, they're trying to get some of these child care centers and some of the educational centers to get panic buttons put into their facilities. Because for us, if somebody hits a panic alarm, that's a priority 1 response no matter what, whether it's residential, whether it's business. And so whenever we sat down with those business owners, we definitely asked them, hey, this is another opportunity that maybe you can target hard in your place. Have a panic alarm put in place. You just hit a button and we'll be there as quick as we can.
Yeah. And this isn't necessarily for Chief Aldridge, but for TJ and his team in Austin. I would just point out that Texas Education Agency actually does not have purview over child care centers. Those are 2 different agencies.
Sure.
So as they consider whether it's 17 million or anything else beyond that, let's make sure we're advocating for other agencies to receive funding that would be for child care centers so that we can do what you're asking. And that's smart.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chief. And I would just add to Mayor's point, I completely agree with that. And especially for our smaller child care centers who may not have necessarily the resources on site to be able to implement that solution.
Correct.
I think it's, it behooves us also to maybe look at potentially recruiting those type of folks for CCPD
Yes.
funding, because it's such a small investment to do that. So anyways, I would love to continue to work with y'all on that. I'd also, like to see us follow up with CCA about some of these items, just to make sure that they're aware and that we're all on the same page moving forward. And if there are opportunities with CCPD, that we can help those smaller agencies to, protect our babies.
Absolutely.
I have a question on that. Chief, I have a question on that. Can you kind of explain a little bit more on when you say the call was placed on hold, or is that?
It wasn't placed on hold, it was placed in our queue.
Okay.
So, I mean, the call was answered by our communication personnel, and they basically put it into the system. And because it wasn't entered as a priority 1 call, it was entered as a priority 2 call. It held, and there were other higher priority calls that were coming in at that time. So we didn't necessarily have the personnel, at least within that district, to be able to answer the call. However, We should have followed our policy and had units from other divisions come over and answer that call. So we've kind of stopped that gap, and we've been able to close that deficiency that we noticed.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is following up to Jared's suggestion. Chief, how can we find out if this would be a CCPD appropriate, charge? And how quickly could we act on it, getting the word out to those child care agencies?
So I'll definitely have to sit down with Keith Morris, because we're going to have some provisions for the community to apply for CCBD funding, through the grants program. And I just need to sit down with him and see how that process looks like. Because what I'm envisioning is that we would probably use our MPOs to file the applications on behalf of these locations, and present that to the board so we could prioritize them and try and get them funding.
At the upcoming holiday, Christmas holiday, those are some spikes when we know, we hear about domestic disputes. And so even though we may not be able to respond that quickly, I would encourage you to do just what you said you were going to do so that we can get some type of clarity and a plan of action.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Just real quick, while we're on that, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for that. I think it's worth that being a future agenda item, just to see what you found out from Keith.
Okay.
And we can respond as a council accordingly.
All right, the next informal report is on reasonable distances from which residents may observe police activity at crime scenes and traffic stops. And we have the able Assistant Chief Robert Aldridge available for questions.
Yeah, thank you, David. I have some questions. So I was reading the IR, and I read a few sentences from the very top. It says, there is no specific requirement on how large or small each perimeter should be because each situation is different. It is important to note that the perimeter requirements do not change just because a person is recording, as long as the individual is recording from a public space. So I have a couple of questions. I was looking through the IR, and I saw the analogies for active shooter, SWAT, aggravated robbery, critical police incidents, and then it talks about the philosophy of the department. I didn't see one for just regular traffic stops, because I think that's the most common that we get. And for one of the issues that we talked about offline in the ZEC a while back is one of the traffic stops. So I didn't see that in here. And I think one of the issues is when someone is recording, I think it does make somewhat of a difference, because they should have the ability to be able to record at a distance where it's visible to be seen if it needs to be replayed.
I agree with you, and our general orders for traffic stops do not delineate anything that has to do with crime scenes or with distances. And for us, every traffic stop is different, just like every active violent crime or violent crime scene is different. Depending on the number of people that are in the vehicle, depending on if it's a stolen vehicle, there are so many parameters that are associated with that. I agree. All the department went through the First Amendment training, which encompassed exactly what you were asking for. We partnered with the law department on that, and we provided training to all of our officers. And so our goal is not to inhibit people from recording. It's not. It's just to put them in a place to where they're safe, we're safe conducting the traffic stop, and not having to divert our attention to have to deal with an issue that's going on close by.
Is there somewhere in the policy that if there is a recording that's taking place, should the officer ask for backup so that that it helps the scenery, or is what is policy procedure when people does it entice the stop because somebody's recording?
Not specifically, no. And it depends also on the nature of the recording. I've had traffic stops before where people are standing on the sidewalk recording me. It is what it is. I'm not that worried about it. But if somebody is overly aggressive in nature, they're yelling things or screaming things, that changes things a little bit. And an officer probably would call for an assist officer to help out, at least manage that part so they could do the traffic stop.
Okay. All the questions I have. Thank you, Chief.
Mm-hmm.
One more, Chief. Training opportunities available for Fort Worth police officers by rank.
I do have a couple questions on this. Now, I saw where the required trainings, but one of the questions I had, and I don't think I was clear when I asked it, so I think that's my fault, is that, is there a requirement for ongoing training?
So every 2 years, we have to continue ongoing training per the state law. So every 2 years, we have to go through 40 hours of mandated training to keep our certifications active, yes.
Is that on an individual basis? So if I got hired today, it'd be 2 years from today?
No, it's based on the calendar for TCOL. So TCOL, we're in the middle of the training cycle right now, and it's based on their calendar. So it was from 2021 to 2023. So within those 2 years, we have to get 40 hours of training completed.
The entire department?
The entire department. If you don't, your license gets suspended.
Okay. And do you guys get a report on that? If they don't meet if they don't get into the training?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they notify us immediately if there's an officer that hasn't met that requirement, yes.
And what is the course of action?
Their license gets suspended.
Well, I mean, their license gets
So-
suspended, and so they're not
They
able
get,
to
they
serve?
get, they get taken off the street, they get
Okay.
taken out of whatever they're doing at the time until they can reconcile that issue with TCOL.
Okay.
And really, the reconciliation is attend training. I don't really can foresee any time our officers haven't met that requirement, though.
I have no questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Chief, thank you. I think that's it.
Yeah, I'll be back later.
All right. The next informal report is on pay adjustments for retention, recruitment, and market competitiveness. And Deanna Giordano is available if there are any questions.
I don't have questions, just thanks to Deanna for hard work to put this forward.
And the next informal report is on Transportation Public Works Director recruitment process. And Deanna is once again available for questions. All right. The next to last informal report is on the right-of-way ordinance and citations for contractor violations. And Michael Owen is available if there are any questions.
I don't really have a question, but what I would like to, do we have any teeth, and maybe they can answer this, but maybe a future IR, I don't know, for all the signs and et cetera that are in our right-of-ways, and how do we just not pick them up, but stop them from, citing the people, et cetera, so it doesn't, because it continues to be the same folks again and again that I see.
I would love to report Michael Crane's campaign signs in the right of way.
Sure. Maybe that's a
That
future
is a
thing.
different issue. We
Okay.
could bring that back.
Sounds good. Thank you.
We get into that issue
A lot, yeah.
a
Yes.
lot.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, the final informal report is an update on broadcasting of city council meetings, and Michelle Good is available if there are any questions.
Yes, I have some.
Michelle?
All right, thank you, Michelle,
Yes.
for the report. If you can just give me a quick summary, because I think one of the things that was brought up before this IR is that we don't have the capability, or it's impossible for us to do it. But can you give us a summary of your IR you have here?
On all the different ways that we can broadcast, or just specifically Facebook?
Specifically Facebook.
Okay. When we first started doing Facebook Live, we did have some technical challenges, and at about the between 45-minute and hour mark, we would get kind of kicked off the platform, so we had to have a staff person monitor it. We do have equipment now that we're using to live stream YouTube, which we can also use to stream the Facebook Live.
Just to cut you off real quick, what's the name of that? Is that StreamYard?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, we used to use something called a Teradek, and now we've got something new that we've been using to do the YouTube streaming, and we haven't had the technical issues with that. But we haven't been using it on Facebook Live since we got the new equipment. While we were not broadcasting on Facebook Live, we did have staff reach out to other cities to see what they were doing when it came to Facebook Live. And so I've got the cities listed in the IR that we found were actually using Facebook Live to broadcast meetings, and those that were using YouTube, which is the service that we had kind of switched to. And one of the reasons that we started doing it on YouTube is YouTube is meant for long-form video, and Facebook really is not. And so when we have a meeting like today where it can go 3-4 hours, Facebook Live just was not the best practice platform for that. And we actually don't know, like while we have the meeting running on Facebook Live, we're not allowed to share any other information on that platform. So we're not sure how that affects the Facebook algorithm with the information that we can get out to residents. So I also have some information that we got, just the pros and cons that we got from some of the different cities. One suggestion we got while we were doing our research is to actually set up a separate Facebook page that we would be able to do the live meeting. So we would be able to do Facebook Live on a page just dedicated to the TV station. And we have established that if that's something that we want to use. That would allow us to show the meeting as a Facebook Live, but it would not impact the regular updates and stuff that we do on the city's page.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
'Cause I'm familiar with Facebook a little bit. And so if we know that our major days that we're gonna Facebook Live, it's gonna be on Tuesdays on council days, there is a mechanism within the Facebook that allows you to preset a post to take place prior to. So if you want a post to come out at 3 o'clock, you can do it literally
Yes.
the day before or an hour before, so that should not impact.
We schedule most of our posts now.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I don't think that's accurate that it will impact. I mean, maybe it is, but if we have why would it impact us posting things and going live at the same time?
Councilmember Nettles, Mayor and Council Renee Tace, Chief Communications Officer. So when you're running the Facebook Live, you could actually post others, but we don't know what the algorithm is going to do to those posts. So it could suppress those additional posts. And so when the recipient is then scrolling through their feed, do they see the actual meeting that's being conducted first, or do they see the other posts? Or do you put a moratorium on your posts during that particular time period? And so that's why we think that one of the solutions could be to have a dedicated Facebook page. Because I think in speaking to some constituents at the end of the day, what some of the voices I have heard from is that it's about the ability to engage in real time for the comments. And so you can tag people, you can be listening to a discussion that is happening, and the ability to do that and say, look at this happening right now that is happening would provide a separate space for them to be able to do that. And when you go to that Facebook webpage, then you would know that it is, when it's running, it is just for live meetings.
I mean, that is a great answer. I appreciate that, and that makes a lot of sense. Because we don't want to post something and then it just falls and nobody sees it. And so it makes a lot of sense. So when you say establishing, and then I'll get on my soapbox, but when you say establishing a separate Facebook account, would it be separate from the City of Fort Worth Facebook? So it would be named, what, City of Fort Worth Facebook Live?
Right now, it's Fort Worth TV.
City of Fort Worth TV. That's what we have it set up as right now.
With the Facebook Live?
That's not to say that we couldn't set up another Facebook page, but that's the one that we established just to test to see how that would go. And so we do currently have that one available if we wanted to start doing Facebook Live on that.
Okay, but that's not our current Facebook page?
No.
Okay, and so I guess one of the
You could
questions was how we
potentially have maybe the best of both worlds, in that you have the Facebook page dedicated to the live meetings. And though it is against kind of what I would consider best practice, and even in our consultation with Facebook personnel that's dedicated to public sector consultations, they said, you know, we're really not meant for anything longer. A meeting where you are asking for interaction, and in the IR, you'll see that the law department has given some opinions about whether or not council members could and they're suggesting against commenting during the actual live stream, possibly after it is not posted. But you could have the dedicated page that does not interrupt what would be the best practice posting for Facebook on our normal page.
Right, and I agree with that, and I think if that's the only way or the best way that this city council can move forward, I would agree with that. It will only frighten me that we would have two different pages, and it can get confusing for people. But I think we would have to do a strong communication to let people know, if you want to watch it Facebook Live, this is the Facebook page that you would go to.
And I think we would continue to do what we do on our main Facebook page at the beginning of every meeting. And that is to post, if you want to watch the meeting, here is the link.
Okay.
And so we would do that to the alternate, the secondary Facebook page, along with our YouTube, which is intended for the long form video.
Okay, and so now I'll go on my rant. So I do believe that the community really, Fort Worth is different, and so Fort Worth has been different for a while, and I think we communicate differently. And being a Fort Worthian, social media has been a great platform to communicate and get news. And I do have a question. You might not have the answer to it right now, but I want to know, when did we start going Facebook Live? How long we've been going since we stopped prior to a few months ago?
We started Facebook Live in February of 2020. I don't know the day that we stopped. I can look that up.
Okay. And so, and I want to say that probably was because of the pandemic, maybe? Or that was just a...
No, I think it was just a suggestion to look at that as another platform. And so in February of 2020, we started doing Facebook Live, and that's when we noticed that we had the problem when we went past a certain number of minutes.
Right, but that's now kind of fixed with the new system.
Yes.
Okay, so again, I think that we as a city have established some type of communication with the community, and we have stripped that away due to some issues. But if we have the capability of bringing it back, and at least giving it a trial run, I would certainly hope that we can get the consensus at this council. Because what I did is I did do some research on the Facebook meetings. And so February 15th, 2022, when we had our redistricting special work session, the length of the meeting was 34 minutes. And on Facebook, you had 2,200 people who watched it. On YouTube, you had 80. And so then you go to March the 1st, it was also a redistricting meeting as well. And this meeting was 1 hour and 23 minutes and 31 seconds. You had 2,000 viewers on Facebook, and you had 86 viewers on YouTube. And I think it's very clear, because even being in ministry, I have Facebook and YouTube. It's just, you get more traction on Facebook. That is where the social media thread is. And I think as a city that we have pushed back on public speaking and opportunities to voice their opinions. Facebook allows you to react right then. So it allows the people to make comments. And I think that we can use those tools as people who are not able to come to City Hall and make those comments in person, who don't have our email address, who is not savvy in business, but they can just sit on their couch and they're looking for a Michael Crane video, but all of a sudden they see the city of Fort Worth and they click on that. And so, what kind of video? I really think it's important that we reestablish the opportunities to give the people a voice to speak on every platform that we have. And I think that we now have the software to do that. I think it's important that we do give it a try. I hope that we can come, I don't know if anybody have any other questions or concerns, but I hope that we can come to a consensus, because I think the millenniums, they talked about the Gen X's today and all of these people. It's Facebook and Instagram. And so I think we need to give that back to the people.
Okay, so it is the decision that we'll start doing the Facebook Lives on the Fort Worth TV Facebook page that we have established?
I think that's a great solution, because I would also say, and maybe you talk with your cable staff, that may be eventually another way to put additional programming out on social media that doesn't get watched because it's right now on a cable channel.
Okay.
So maybe you utilize that in a more robust way. And then just working with staff on the comments that may be on Facebook, we need to create a fair sense of accountability for residents. I don't want someone to think that all of their questions are going to answer just because they put a comment on a Facebook page. Now, we may glean, okay, this is a really big issue for people, we need to go back and handle it, but we just need to have a policy maybe in place that staff knows internally how we're going to handle those questions from citizens, so they don't feel like we're jolting them because we didn't immediately get back to their random comment on a Facebook.
We can add that, and then we'll also work with the city attorney to develop the disclaimer that was mentioned in the IR, just stating that, you know, like, official business isn't going to be conducted during the comment section of the
Right.
video, so.
Okay. Jared?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I support the idea too, and to Mayor's point, I also support, you know, seeing other forward TV content, whether it's, you know, zoning commission or other advisory committees as well. So I think it's a great opportunity to engage folks and meet our, you know, significant subset of our residents where they are. And you'd be surprised. I mean, we'll probably get much more traction back on all of our pages. I know I've seen several folks, for example, when the Sigma Gamma Rose came to receive a recognition, and they started tagging all 108,000 Sigma Gamma Rose in Fort Worth on the video and on the post. So it's just an example of like how we can get better engagement and meet people where they are with important discussions and meetings that are happening in the city.
And we'll continue to look, and like in the IR, we mentioned Roku, Apple TV, some of those other options. Cable subscriptions are going down as these other platforms are becoming available. And as I mentioned in the IR, we have had some of the cable providers say that they're going to start charging for the municipal channel, which we've never had to pay for in the past. So we want to start looking for some other options as cable maybe becomes more expensive, and there are other options for us to get the content out there.
Sounds good. Thank you, Michelle.
Just
Go ahead, Gina.
One comment for Michelle. Yeah, I would certainly encourage staff to look at our franchise agreement with the cable providers, because back in the days, back in the 80s, when we first started using video on cable, you know, that was provided for in the franchise agreement. So if they talk about charging us, just make sure that we have that agreement lawyered, because I don't think they can just decide to do that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Mayor, that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you very much. On to significant zoning cases for December 13th, next week. Anybody have anything they want to pull or talk about? No? Moving on to the M&C log, anything there that's of concern for council members?
It's not a concern, but just to make a note of number 43 from property management, it says authorize execute the lease, blah, 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 8636 Camp Bowie. It shows that it is District 9, but it's actually District 3.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Anybody else? Moving right along. Our next presentation is with Tanyan Farley with an update on future City Hall.
Good to go. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here again today. I will keep this brief today as part of our normal quarterly update. I know you have a lot of agenda items today and then session tonight, so a couple quick updates I want to run through. First off, we're going to run through an update on our MWBE business equity spend on the project to date and where we're tracking overall to goal. I think you heard some wonderful news about all the awesome things that Christina and Gwen and the department are doing and being recognized for. I can echo that from the project side. They've been incredible partners. We'll talk a little about that here in just a second. We'll talk about some schedule updates to the council chambers facility and then our surplus furniture program update. So quick update today. We're going to run through a couple things. All right, so as of today, and this includes committed spend as well, we have a overall project spend of about 30% so far committed to MWBE Local Business Equity Partners, which is fantastic on a program of this nature. Just a quick reminder, a couple different goals on this project. So our CMAR, which is Lindbeck, has a goal of 35% spend overall. Our A&E at Boca Pal has a goal of 25%, and then our Athenian team has a 10% goal, but we're actually a local qualified MWBE vendor, so we'll achieve 100% from the program manager side of the house. Pending the final scope of the program, We anticipate the total spend to be nearly 38%, which is awesome on a program of this nature. And, you know, within those numbers, we'll provide some additional detail moving forward, but we're looking to make sure we include a wide range of vendors and partners from the community. I think our team at Lindbeck has done an awesome job working with the folks at the Business Equity Group as well with our team to really reach out and find some good groups in the community that traditionally have not participated in public entity programs. And we've had really great success with those groups so far, and we'll have some further good news to share in our update in Q1 of next year. But like I said, at this point in time, spend of about 30% on the project, which is great. From a schedule update, so as shared earlier this year, after purchasing the building and going through some of our initial assessment on the site, we found that a lot of the site lives within an existing federal floodway easement stemming from the previous reroute of the Trinity River. Since February, when we found out about this, we have been working with our partners at TRWD and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to navigate the federal 408 permit process for the chambers and anything located on the site. The yellow line that you see here is the existing 408 federal floodway easement that we have to follow. As a part of that, there's a full permitting exercise that we have to go through. I can tell you it's a very arduous process. There's a lot of requirements there, not only from a green stormwater initiative, but also for valley storage and overall support. There's also 2 models that have to be completed as a part of this process, the existing model and then the new Central City model as part of the reroute of the river and the Panther Island aspects. This is a very difficult program. In addition to that, in June, when we submitted our initial 408 permit for review, we were informed that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was out of funding to review 408 processes for the year. And that roughly resulted in a 3 to 4 month delay until they received funding in October. We actually took an interim route to try and do a special funding route on this program, but the approval on that process took a significant amount of time and actually wasn't approved until after funding was reallocated again in October. So we were resubmitting our 408 permit with the updates on Friday of this week, and I'll provide an update in January of kind of where we're at on that process. But at that point in time, this puts our council chamber facility to be delivered in Q1 of 2024 instead of Q4 of 2023. And so we'll continue to work with y'all on what that means for council meetings on a week-to-week basis in this facility. The timeline of the tower itself, the move-in timeline is still intact, obviously, as we're under demo and construction as we speak. I actually left hard hats and steel-toe boots over at the tower today to come over for this session. So that's moving along at this point in time. So we'll continue to provide you an update on that as we move forward. Last update I have for y'all before we run through some next kind of step items here. So as I mentioned, when we purchased the building, there was a lot of furniture that existed in the building today. A lot of that does not fit the program that we'll be taking to go forward. If you remember, if we left the existing furniture and floor plans, about 900 people could occupy the space. With the updates to the program and the design, the furniture being allocated, we're closer to 1,500 or 1,600 at this point in time, which is really great. Now, what to do with that stuff, right? We've allocated a lot of that furniture to other city departments that are not making the move, which has been great. We've been able to replenish a lot of city departments, a lot of city divisions. In addition to that, we ran through a public auction that we had to complete prior to being able to go through a donation program. And so I want to give a special shout out to Manya Shore and the library group for connecting us with the Wellman Project and some really awesome groups in the community to take our surplus furniture and put it to good use. So far, we've been able to donate to more than 300 teachers and nonprofit staff, 86 schools and 17 nonprofits, and about $140,000 in total estimated value has been donated so far. You can see we've had several pickups. It's been great to see people come out, talk about how they're going to put this to good use in their classrooms and their communities, and it's great to see it go to another great home. So we do still have some surplus furniture remaining, desks, chairs, storage cabinets, shelving, etc. If there are nonprofits that anyone watching or on this council would like us to look at to donate some of this to, please reach out to me, or you can send an email to futurecityhall@forwardtexas.gov, and we'll make sure that it finds a good home. So this is really exciting. Anything we can do to keep things out of the landfill is obviously a great thing, not only for our community, but for the sustainability of the program overall. Any questions on any of these items before I cover a few more updates?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I wish I had known about the furniture giveaway and the opportunities for nonprofits to be able to take advantage of. And I hate that it was revealed this way in this public forum, but there are a number of inner city nonprofits that handle children and other needs of people who are financially challenged. And so the idea that we would be able to do this but not make it available to them is troubling to me. Do you have an inventory of what's remaining?
Yes, ma'am. We have an inventory that we've kept updated throughout the whole process, so I'm happy to work with you to bring any other groups we can into the process.
I doubt if I'm the only council member, and I'm thinking specifically about child care providers in the Stop 6 area. I would think that there may be some need in District 8 and District 3 as well. But I would really like to be able to be as transparent as possible with what we're giving away.
Yes, ma'am.
So please send that to me, and if anybody else asks for it, them too. But I want to know what you have left.
No, that sounds great. And just to be really clear, the Center for Transforming Lives and the Wellman Project, the two groups we work with, act as a conduit to a number of nonprofits, schools, childcare providing, and otherwise in the community. So I think let's do a sync offline and figure out what groups we want to make sure we hit. We may have hit some of them already, and we can work together on that.
And what I will tell you is, what I tell staff all the time is, if you include the council members, we are also the eyes and ears of those such agencies in our district. So, to leave us out of that conversation, well, to put us in will be beneficial.
Sure, happy to do it.
Real quick, thank you for the sustainability open house. And so for my colleagues, this actually exists because I had a couple of constituents reach out with some questions. So we're hosting this to get some feedback and give some information. And I think as we move forward, I'd like to see other opportunities for us to pick a specific topic and invite the community in and really engage with them about, so they know the changes that are coming and that we make sure we're dialoguing with them, and get with me offline so that I can make sure there's a list of folks that we make sure we extend that invitation to the Sustainability Open House.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's a really important part of the program. I think some of you will remember that as a part of the scoping of the one-stop shop experience and some other elements in the building, we had several public outreach sessions, both in person and virtual. I agree, part of our normal program is, as we finalize some of the designs and programs in the building, is to go back with more of a city listening session. So those are things we'll definitely look forward to, and we're looking forward to that open house because the city and the design team together have done a really awesome job of finding a number of ways to bring sustainability into the program. Okay, so a couple things here. Employee update sessions, we'll be going back to the employees that we used and worked with during our employee voice sessions to really share how their input was used in the program, what some of the floors and furniture and elements will look like, and really start to hear and shape some of that new way of work that we're driving with this program. I'll be providing a scope and budget update at the end of January here of kind of where we're at on all things. We'll have that sustainability open house January 25th. As Councilmember Beck mentioned, that is going to be hosted at the Central Library, is my understanding. We'll finalize that and put that in the invite here pretty soon. And then finally, we'll have some concept floor opportunities in Q1 of 2023 where city staff will be able to register to come and really test out the new way of work and the new furniture, new technology and otherwise in the tower. So we're excited about being able to bring that to life. Cool. Any other questions? Great. Short and sweet today.
Thank you, Tanyan. Next up is Victor Turner with Neighborhood Services to talk about our neighborhood improvement program.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Victor Turner, Neighborhood Services. It's that time again in the year where we make recommendations about a neighborhood to invest in that are one of our most distressed neighborhoods. This year was a little different. We solicited outside help from a consulting firm to take a look at our neighborhood improvement program and some tweaks that we could make to improve the program. This particular graphic shows all the various tools and funding and plans that the city has underway, with the neighborhood improvement strategy being one tool as part of our overall neighborhood and conservation strategy. As you know, the firm that we selected is also working with the city on an overall neighborhood conservation plan, but we looked at this particular program to see how it can be tweaked to enhance our overall plan. This is a summary of all the different neighborhoods that have been selected in the past. As you can see, there have been 6 neighborhoods scattered across the city. We have really improved our expenditure level in all those neighborhoods, which you'll see on a future slide. So we're recommending our 7th neighborhood today. This is a very collaborative program. We work with several departments. You can see those listed on the various different activities that we do in these various neighborhoods, including police and code and with neighborhood services, coordinating those efforts, PARD, TPW as well. This summarizes how we've operated the program in the past with a timeline of neighborhood selection and planning, early action, and then implementation with the goal of trying to expend the funds within 2 years. With this process, as well as what we plan to do in the future, there will be a pre and post survey of the residents to see how they view their neighborhoods prior to our investment and then how they look at it afterwards. So how have we changed? This is a summary of the expenditures from the very first neighborhood till last year, LVT. As you can see, we've pretty much spent all the dollars in the neighborhoods. Ash Crescent has one item left that will need to be done, and that's Smiley Park, and that will be finished. Como, which was done in 2021, you can see we well ahead of pace to meet that 2-year expenditure goal that we had set. This particular report card shows our investment with the neighborhood improvement dollars only. So these are some of the outputs showing what we did with street lights, sidewalks, trash litter, streets, and cameras in the 6 neighborhoods. And as you can see here, there has been positive change in all the neighborhoods, so our investments have paid off. You can see in each neighborhood it's been a positive, with the exception of a couple of areas that are still needing some work, but we think the program has been very beneficial to the neighborhoods we've selected. So for this year, as I mentioned, this is part of an overall neighborhood conservation plan. When we hired the consulting firm, they interviewed neighborhood leaders, various city staff members, some council members, the CMO office, as well as our local housing authority, Fort Worth Housing Solutions. And they looked at some of the strengths and weaknesses and some things that we could do differently. And so the recommendations include improving our scoring methodology. Previously, we had 19 variables, so they basically reduced that to 8 and put them in 3 buckets. Also, we had some, I guess, differences in sizes of neighborhoods, so the recommendation was to just go on census tracts and then also to extend our timeline to 3 years. So this shows New York City and Fort Worth, where it just compares one city and simplicity of their scoring and metrics versus what we were doing. And I think each year we were adding a metric, try to help separate neighborhoods. So what we did this year is basically take all those different ones and combine them. So this is a summary of what we had been scoring on in past years, and you can see the breakdown and the 3 buckets that was in previously versus what we went to this year. So financial hardship, opportunity, and neighborhood condition. The opportunity is the education component. In previous years, we looked at percent of residents that did not have a high school diploma. This year's percent that do not have a bachelor's degree. Replace that. The neighborhood condition includes some of the same items that we've looked at in past years. And then financial hardship we've included in the past as well. So each bucket is 30 points, and you can see the smaller subsets in those categories. This is a map of the previously 6 selected neighborhoods, and you can see there are some differences in the size. So that was one of the reasons we decided to go with the census tracts versus neighborhoods. And this graph basically talks about the process of what we would do in year 1, year 2, and then any post-neighborhood improvement investment. So it would be more extensive planning. I know there's been quite a bit of planning in years past, but this year, using the LVT as a model, how we would do a little bit more extensive planning in year 1. Year 2 would be our investments, and then anything that we could not fund with neighborhood improvement, it'll tee it up for whether it's PAYGO or bond funding in the next year. So this is just a summary of those specifics, what I mentioned for year 1. And then year 2 would be a little bit more extensive investment. And then year 3, as I mentioned, whether it's PAYGO or bond funding that could be used for larger scale projects. The dark or bright red are the census tracts that scored the highest. You can see 1, 2, and 3. They were in that 79 and 87 category. We took out NIPs that were previously selected as part of this scoring. And this is how they came out. As you can see, they're very close in scoring the top 3 neighborhoods, with Historic Marine being the top. This is a map showing with the aqua green border the area. You can see the boundaries listed on the right. And this map shows some of the improvements that have been made previously in Northside, which is a little outside of the area we're selecting or recommending today. And mostly, there's no really major improvements in that dark black area, no infrastructure or sidewalk type improvements. It was a few street light improvements. And these are a few slides showing the housing stock and the condition of some of the housing in the area. Photo here showing sidewalks, no sidewalks. And so our recommendation is a resolution approving this neighborhood next week. And then if you all approve, it would start the process in mid-January. Questions?
Questions for Victor? Any reaction? Yeah, go ahead, Leonard.
Victor, we had a chance to go through this last week, and could you just talk a little bit about how the neighborhoods are selected? And, you know, because my office was never engaged in the process, and so I just want to, you know, I was a little surprised at what we went through last week, because, you know, there are needs in the district, and I think in one of the slides, maybe slide 11, you mentioned that some of the council members were engaged in this conversation. So I'm just wondering what that process is and how I can be engaged on behalf of the district in the conversation. And as I mentioned last week, what I'm specifically interested in is in sidewalks for Old Decatur Road. Where there's a huge need, where kids are walking to school along bar ditches, and there's been accidents, and it's, you know, it's a real safety concern. So just how can I get engaged in that on their behalf?
Yeah, so what we did, along with the help of the consulting firm, we looked at census tracts throughout the city. So it was a very comprehensive approach, and it was based on that census data. And so in determining areas that were most distressed, that's where those 8 variables were considered and a score assigned to that. And then in regards to engaging council members, we hosted a lunch, and I think we sent invitations out. Everyone's scheduled. I know it couldn't accommodate everyone, but we reached out to council members when the firm was trying to interview to get your input. So we did that, and then we'll continue to reach out with council members because there may be other funding sources that could assist. Like you mentioned, sidewalks, and we do have some other programs aside from TPW that could potentially help with some infrastructure. So we're looking at that now to see if the neighborhoods you mentioned meet that 51% or more low mod income, where we could use some federal funding in those areas. So even though this is one program with the city, we do have others that can help some of the other distressed neighborhoods, not just NIP.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Questions, Council? Carlos?
Victor, thank you, for the presentation. It is helpful to see the evolution of the scoring methodology as it's come. When I first came on council, I was aware of what we had initially used, for our scoring metrics and methods, and that has substantially improved, over time. I know that across the city, there are different areas that have varying degrees of need. I'm familiar with those that are in my council district, and I'm very appreciative and thankful that these are finally getting addressed. Historically, for many decades past, these areas have languished and have not been visited, by investments, from the public or private sectors. In fact, now that Jim Lane has passed, I know that he could appreciate the work that he did, his predecessors did, including then Mayor Granger, in trying to get attention to this area when there was a severe economic downturn. And now we're in a position where we can help in areas of housing stock, basic public infrastructure, because among the different areas in my council district, when we first started, when Aubrey Thackert was with us, the Northside area was a large area, too large to really address with the amount of funding that we've had before, historically. And we had to be very selective in what we tackled at the time. So, again, my sincere appreciation for your staff to working to make the scoring methodologies much more detailed and objective. Thank you.
Questions, council members? No. So it sounds like, in summary, Victor, moving forward, this will be our new criteria and eligibility for neighborhoods, and focus on census tracts rather than entire neighborhoods per se, and that's a better investment in a smaller geographic area.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions about that change, council members?
Yeah, and is
Leonard?
that through the scoring system?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say it like that. I'll let Victor answer.
What was the question?
That's applied by the scoring system?
Yeah, to the census tract, the scoring system is.
Yeah. Well, that's where my confusion is, I guess, is that, in a large part of the district, they're never going to score they're never going to qualify by score for this kind of neighborhood improvement investment. And so I don't know, there seems to be a flaw in that if we are never able to do that because of their economic situation.
Yeah, and keep in mind, it includes more than just economic, but we're trying to narrow it down and identify those neighborhoods that are most distressed. And so there will be some neighborhoods that won't score if you're talking about most distressed. That's why I mentioned to you, if the neighborhood meets certain other criteria, we can use other programs. So it's not just one program to try to do everything. So we're trying to address the most distressed. Ideally, we won't have any distressed neighborhoods. Hopefully, we work ourselves out of even having to do a program like this. But until we do, those are the neighborhoods that we're targeting with these dollars.
And in response to Leonard's comments and questions, though, I appreciate your first content slide that describes the different programs and tools. So, in other words, NIP is very specific for distressed neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods that may not meet this criteria should be considered possibly for these other plans or funding streams on behalf of the city of Fort Worth. I think maybe that's what you're trying to get to, that there's a frustration and maybe a lack of communication on all departments to these neighborhoods, that NIP is not your only source of help, especially to your point on El Decatur Road on sidewalks.
Yeah.
There are other funding mechanisms we need to consider.
Well, that's right, and so we get frustrated because we don't rank high enough with, or we rank too high with TPW. And so as a source, we don't, those
For those other
areas,
funding.
yeah,
Okay.
they're not scoring well enough to get that sidewalk investment, so we're kind of caught in the middle there.
I see.
In some way.
Okay.
So
Maybe that's a follow-up for TPW then, because they're not
looking-
going to fit in NIP.
Yeah.
So we follow up with TPW on where they would fit and how.
Yeah.
Okay. Alan and then Elizabeth?
So, Victor, thank you, and I appreciate meeting with you about this last week and you explaining. I'm, the word is not pleased. I'm glad that the Woodhaven area made the list. That area has been hurting for quite a while, and we need to try to do something over in that area too. We'll continue to look at other tools, but through part of our discussion, you mentioned that in future we might be able to hit more than one area moving forward. Can you maybe speak to that for a second and where we are?
Yeah, I think above my pay grade, but I think in conversation with CMO and council, if there's some opportunity maybe to do more than one. I think one of the recommendations was to add, I think an additional 500,000, maybe more, to do some planning efforts in more than one neighborhood was one thought. However, as I mentioned to Councilmember Firestone, if a neighborhood fits our CDBG criteria, we can be doing work in that neighborhood in addition to what can be going on with NIP. So there could be another method for us to be working in more than one neighborhood at a time. And then as you can see through the phase process, there would be up to 3 neighborhoods maybe going on at one time anyway. They just won't get funded in the same year. So we'll have multiple neighborhoods getting some type of investment in them either way.
Thank you. Councilmember Beck?
Thank you, Victor. I appreciate that. I did have the opportunity to attend that luncheon, and it was very informative, and I think my colleague Michael Crane was there with me as well. And I think we were the only 2 that attended that luncheon. So I appreciate you having that because that was really informative, and it let us know how this particular program works. I appreciate you taking the time to walk me through the new scoring criteria when we met the other day. We've talked about this both on the Neighborhood and Quality and Revitalization Committee and then personally around this particular project. There's also another neighborhood improvement project that was started before my tenure that we're wrapping up. And so I've had the privilege of working with y'all on that as well. I think this scoring criteria is exactly where it needs to be. If a neighborhood is falling outside of a recommendation under the methodology that we have now that we've developed, with people much, much smarter than I am when it comes to things like this. I think we're doing the right thing. I appreciate that we all, I know I get hit up for sidewalks all the time in District 9. I'm glad that TPW has gone to the 50-50 model so that we can start funding these. But I appreciate you keeping the focus of this particular program on those economically hurting residents in our city, and that should absolutely be the priority as we move forward. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Any other questions, council? Thank you, Victor. Appreciate it very much. Moving on, our next presentation is Chief Aldridge and Officer Gorey to talk about boarding homes.
Mayor, Council, thanks for having me back. I want to first start off by thanking DJ Harrell, Planning and Data Analytics, Fernando Costa, ACM Washington, the legal, Melinda Ramos. This is a multi-person effort. Whenever we kind of unpacked this problem, we realized that there were so many departments that were involved in this. I'm going to let Lieutenant Gorey take through the heavy lifting of this. You're going to see that there might be quite a few slides. Most of those are for context. They're not so much for conversation. So at the end, we'll definitely be able to take a lot of questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor, Council.
I'm Chris Gorey. I'm the lieutenant over the Community Alliance Division.
Sorry, Lieutenant, I demoted you. I did not mean to do that.
That's okay.
Okay.
So I'm here to talk about boarding homes, and currently the city of Fort Worth doesn't have any ordinance regulating boarding homes. A boarding home was recently defined by a health and safety code that houses 3 or more individuals who are disabled or elderly, and provides some of this coursework to kind of occupy their time. We estimate there's about 75 to 130 in the city limits, but that's very loose because it's not regulated, so we don't know the true scope of the program. This is a quick map of an informal database that CIT has been keeping track of since 2017. That kind of shows the locations of where all these, at least boarding homes known to us, are located. We included this slide to kind of show you that they're just single-family residences, and so they could be your neighbor and you're not aware of it. I do want to make a few distinctions. Currently, the city ordinance does have boarding house in it. Just think of that as a lodging house where unrelated people are living together. And is not different, it is very different from the boarding home situation. That is currently governed by the city ordinance. Group homes or community homes, that's governed by health and safety code. We see those relatively often with like assisted living facilities. So the distinctions to be made here, community homes or group homes, and even I mess up the vernacular from time to time, but that's group homes. Boarding houses, we'll talk about changing the name in the future. And then boarding homes are what we're trying to get an ordinance created so we can protect disabled and elderly individuals. Like I said, the scope's not really known because they're not registered, so this is just an estimate of how many we have. They can fly under the radar. Based on that list, that informal list I mentioned, we picked 30 from those zip codes to go do site visits in order to put this presentation together. Of those 30 sites, 14 were still active within the last year, so we pulled some data from first responders. Of the 14 locations, police invested about $15,000, not including any kind of follow-up investigation. Fire department, $173,000 with 179 responses, and MedStar, nearly 200 responses for $45,000. Some of the common violations observed, I'm not going to go over this entire list, but we see a lot of issues with my list. Public stairs being occupied, not having enough bathrooms, the kitchen being unsanitary, the residents being not free from insects or pests. On July 20th, I sent the CIT team out. They did all the legwork on this presentation, and they went out and visited 10 houses, an additional 11 as well. And these are kind of the common ones that they found. Worth pointing out, staff member recently arrested by SORT, that's our sex offender registry. So the person in charge of the house was a sex offender. The number of people in one dwelling can range from 8 all the way up to 12. Roaches and bed bugs, broken ACs, and locks on the refrigerators and pantries. We did some benchmarking, and I'm going through this pretty quick, I apologize, but we did some benchmarking. This report is done yearly. Right now, Dallas, El Paso, San Antonio, and Brenham, Texas are the 4 that report to this. Harris County, Houston PD also does their own boarding home thing. We included some photos to show the contents of how some of these homes present. An unsanitary fridge. This lady only has a bucket to sit on with her no doorknob. Beds being close together, not providing any kind of storage area. Blocked hallways, fire hazard. Broken windows is what this slide is. These are 1 bedroom, 3 people crammed in that is closely. Damage to the drywall. This is the locks on the refrigerator I mentioned. Some of these residents don't have access to food and balanced food either. There was a house that had a diabetic, but they only fed him pasta. Fire extinguisher that is empty. This center photo that kind of shows down the hallway is actually an improved garage. And the person who lives in that garage is confined to a wheelchair. However, he cannot get through that entryway. So he has to exit the house, come in through the front door to use the facilities within that location. I do want to stress that not every boarding home operates like this. There are probably some that operate within the city limits that operate well. But there are some that are extorting their clients. One house they visited had 12 residents in a 3-bedroom, 2 people in one, 2 people in one, and 8 people in the third. And they charge $40 per tenant. So we're looking at a little over $11,000. And unfortunately, one of those tenants only gets $950 in Social Security, so he's left with $10 a month to kind of cover whatever frivolous expense he wants. These are all overall goals to improve the living conditions, protect that vulnerable community, identify these locations in the event of a natural disaster, and hopefully reduce first responder calls for service at these locations. Based on this, we kind of put together estimated savings and what we could potentially save, at least from the city of Fort Worth first responder standpoint, FD and PD. We can come back to that if you guys have any questions later. And I'll pass it over to Chief in regards to the recommendations and next steps.
Okay, so our recommendation, of course, is to create a city ordinance that aligns with the health and safety code, and basically do some of those benchmarkings that we have. Another one is, annual permits. We went back and forth on this, but we thought code compliance would be the best department to try and, manage that, take the money in. We can definitely help with some of the inspections along with the fire department, and code compliance also would help with that. Our adult protective services, we always respond to these locations anyway whenever we get calls. We'll continue to do the follow-ups with that, and they communicate with adult protective services as well. And so this is kind of the flow chart of how it worked. Somebody put in an application, we'll do all the inspections, we'll either issue or not issue the permit based on those inspections and the recommendations. And so really for the next steps, our recommendation after we talked with planning and data analytics along with DJ, he helped us get this number. We believe that a fair number for the permitting fee is $1,500. And that basically we have a yearly renewal fee that they have to apply each year because there are times that they may apply once, but it may go into disrepair. So we need to constantly continually check up on these these locations. Also another recommendation, by state statute, we can at least go up to $2,000 a fine per day for any kind of offenses that we see. And that's a state, limit that we can do. The state fines and any kind of application fees that we have, they go back into the program. They don't go into the general fund. They go help managing this program for either personnel cost, whatever it takes to make sure that we can continue to make this be successful. So our recommendation is to adopt the ordinance on January 10th. If adopted, we're going to have a grace period from January 10th to April 15th where we can contact these homes that we know that are operating to get into compliance. And so we want to give them that opportunity to make the application fee. We can do the inspections. We can work with them to get their places up to compliance. From that time, we basically, once April 15th hits, that's when we'll start our enforcement effort and we'll kind of move on from there. I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. We have Brandon Bennett here with code compliance. I want to thank Gory and his staff because he's the one that kind of brought this to us. We really didn't know the scope of the problem until we kind of dug into this a little bit.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Bivens has got a question.
Yes, I want to thank staff for this report. It's quite heartbreaking when you think about it. I've got one thing I'd like is to have a list of these known homes categorized by district so that we can all know where they are in our district. The other thing is a question. When you take a look at a sex offender operating a home, how does something like that happen? What is there a gap in the application process, or did this operator just fall up under the radar? That's real confusing to me.
So right now there are 0 regulations in reference to the boarding home. So there would have been no application process. We would have never known that he existed.
This is so very sad, but I applaud your efforts to get on top of it. But I do want to know where they are in my district, and I'm sure other council members would want to know too. Do you guys have that information readily available?
Yes, ma'am, we can definitely get it to everybody.
Please remember what Lieutenant Gory mentioned. The map is not complete. The data is based solely upon observations that police have been able to make. So it will be misleading if we send you information about these locations by district, because it'll give you a false sense about the the prevalence of these boarding homes.
Fernando, I'm good with incomplete information. Whatever they have now, they can send it to me. It doesn't have to be perfect or complete, but I do want to know what they know right now.
As long as we qualify in that way, we can provide you with the information we have.
Any other questions, staff? Councilmember Beck? No?
I don't have any questions. So you're good. But thank you so very much for all of the work that you did. And there's some folks sitting in the back, or
Yes.
sitting in the back row. So if you could stand up, if you're on the CIT team, I see two of those, and I see two law liaisons in the back.
Yes.
And they really did the lion's share of this work to make sure we get it done. So thank y'all very much for doing
Yes.
it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thanks to Councilmember Beck for bringing this to our attention. I know there's best practices in other cities that the departments responded to, so thanks, Elizabeth, we appreciate it. We're on the right path, so keep going. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next is to Dana Bergdorf to brief on short-term rentals.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Appreciate the opportunity to be back before you to discuss short-term rentals. The last time I was before you was back in August when we had completed a round of public input using public meetings and even a recorded Q&A session, online feedback. So lots of good input over the summer. And thanks to communications and public engagement, also to Melinda Ramos for that. You'll recall that what we presented to you in August was information that we'd gathered through a data mining firm that had looked at short-term rental activity throughout the city in terms of what they saw as active locations. We also looked at zoning options that we were suggesting could be considered if the city council wanted to address short-term rentals in residential districts. We talked about registration ordinance, and then we posed some policy questions to you. Well, since that time, there was a lawsuit that came up with the city of New Orleans that limits our ability to treat Fort Worth resident-owned or even owner-occupied short-term rentals differently from our investor-owned short-term rentals. And so you may recall that in fact, all of the options beyond retaining the current ordinance, all of the options we presented to you for zoning differentiated owner-occupied short-term rental from investor-owned short-term rental. So we wanted to give you this update on the zoning options. We wanted to move forward with the recommended registration ordinance and enforcement steps, and then lay out those next steps for you, if assuming you'd like to proceed with one or more of these. So just a quick reminder that a short-term rental is residential property that's available for rent for a guest for a period ranging from 1 to 29 days. So 30 days or more of a lease to a tenant is not considered a short-term rental. It's just considered regular rental, which is allowed within all of our residential zoning districts. Next, just a quick reminder on the goals for addressing short-term rentals. We presented this to you a couple of times earlier this year. I'll just review them. Preserving residential quality of neighborhoods, protecting from commercial lodging encroachment, ensuring health and safety of guests and residents, supporting tourism in a balanced way, preserving residential housing supply, collecting hotel occupancy tax from legal short-term rentals, and minimizing the impact on staff and recovering costs for code enforcement. So, as I mentioned with the Fifth Circuit decision, and again, thank you to Melinda Ramos for her work on this piece, limits our ability to differentiate. So what we're recommending is basically a fairly simple option. And in talking with individual council members, it seems that there could be a majority who would support, if there was interest in amending the zoning ordinance, that there would be support in allowing conditional use permit applications within residential zoning. Again, not distinguishing between owner-occupied or investor-owned in terms of who can apply. It'd be any residential property owner who could apply. And then it would be the same case-by-case process that we use today with zoning changes. So again, just as a quick reminder, today, any residential property owner can apply for a zoning change to allow short-term rental activity. That would be done, for example, as a PD, a planned development, say for A5 zoning plus short-term rental. That application would go to the zoning commission and then to city council for consideration, again, on a case-by-case basis. The conditional use permit, again, very similar, basically the same process as a zoning change, but the arguable benefit of a conditional use permit is that it can be time limited and can be revoked. Whereas a zoning change would need to either be initiated by the property owner or would need to be initiated as a council-initiated zoning change by the city council. We would recommend that the consideration of conditional use permits, if any were to be approved over time, assuming that some would be, that the city council would limit the density of approved CUPs by block or within particularly multifamily buildings. We're seeing more interest in short-term rental activity, not just in single-family homes, but also in multifamily buildings and mixed-use buildings. So again, if City Council would like to address short-term rental activity in residential zoning beyond the zoning change process, then we would recommend that you add the conditional use permit option to the zoning ordinance. So let me stop there and just see if there are questions about this. It's quite a bit of a simplification from the options we shared with you in August.
Questions for Dana? Go ahead, Leonard.
Yeah, in the original presentation, Dana, I think you used the example of a bed and breakfast.
Correct.
How does that fall into this discussion and these developments?
Yes. So that was option 2, where we had a bed and breakfast home and a bed and breakfast inn. And that's likely, and I may need to defer to Melinda on this, but that is likely one of those sections of the ordinance that we might need to revisit, because bed and breakfast home is defined in the zoning ordinance as owner occupied, whereas bed and breakfast inn is defined as typically investor owned, although it could also be owner occupied. And so I don't know yet whether we would be able to limit bed and breakfast home and the consideration for that to owner occupied dwellings given that lawsuit in that court case. So, but yeah.
Any other questions for Dana right now? Keep going.
All right. So next, beyond zoning, we did go over with you in August the idea of bringing forward a registration ordinance. This would require registration for short-term rental activity. We would only want to allow legal short-term rentals to register with the city. There would be an annual fee to cover city costs. There would be, of course, the hotel occupancy tax collection, which cannot be used to administer the registration platform or enforcement, but of course is legally required to be collected or to be paid and then and then hopefully collected. We would require that the property owner consent to the registration or register themselves. That would help in some cases where we might have tenants who are subleasing, if you will, their dwelling for short-term rental, but may or may not have the owner's consent. We think that's important. And then with that owner consent for registration, if the property sells, that registration would not be transferable. That next owner would need to register, similar to what we have for certificates of occupancy. We would ask for a 24/7 local contact, regardless of the owner's location of residency, or if it's a management company. One guest or group at a time, regardless of the size of the home or the unit. We would want to limit to 3 people per bedroom with a maximum of 9 people. We want to be a little bit more restrictive. Arlington allows up to 12 people, but since the average household size in Fort Worth is 3 people in a single-family home and 2 people in a multifamily unit, we think the 3 people per bedroom is a good limitation. We would require on-premise parking only. We would not allow events or parties, no outdoor gatherings or music after 10 p.m., require the Good Neighbor Guide, and then have the registration provision that it could be placed on probation or revoked, which is similar to what we have for multifamily registration through the city today.
Can I ask you a question on that slide? You
Yes, sir.
limited to 3 people per bedroom at the max of 9.
Yeah.
What about locations that have more than 3 bedrooms? So the
So it'd be
limit
we were suggesting a max of 9 total.
total.
Yeah, yeah, we were
And
suggesting.
so how does all
So
of,
even if it was a 5-bedroom or what have you. So Arlington is 12 maximum regardless of bedrooms.
okay.
Any other questions? Keep going, Dana. Thank you.
All right. So next piece touches on enforcement. And so you'll recall that with occupancy, code compliance responds to complaints, whether it's a residential structure or commercial structure or whatever it may be. If it's a zoning violation, they respond on a complaint basis. And so earlier this year, when we began identifying potential zoning change options for short-term rentals, they limited their enforcement to not just complaints, but would only address the short-term rental properties in terms of any citations issued where there were nuisance violations, perhaps related to trash or garbage, parking violations, noise, what have you, and obviously any police matters. We would recommend that we go back to enforcing the way we did on a complaint basis, being, again, reactive rather than proactive, but where code would be able to address the zoning violation, whether there's a nuisance violation or not. And then lastly, we would want to include in the registration ordinance that advertising for a short-term rental is prima facie evidence of short-term rental use. You'll recall that one of code's challenges is that when they're responding to complaints, there's a number of site visits that they need to make in order to determine whether short-term rental activity is occurring or not. And so again, that would just be used when there's complaints so that they could help make their case and not have to basically do stakeouts at properties for those matters. So let me stop there and see if there's questions on that piece.
You're good.
Okay. All right. So, sorry, I didn't realize this was going to be, had it fancy. So if City Council would like to amend the zoning ordinance to allow conditional use permit applications, and again, that would be the staff's recommendation if you'd like to address the zoning ordinance, then we would prepare a text amendment, post it on the website, share it with interested folks. The zoning commission would consider and vote on that text amendment and then send you that recommendation for a public hearing before the city council to vote on that text amendment. And then if that were approved, then staff would be able to receive conditional use permit applications from property owners.
Elizabeth, go ahead.
When all of this discussion first kicked off, one of the things that we had talked about was a density restriction.
Yes.
And so is that part of, and maybe I missed it. If I did, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah, at the very bottom. Yep.
Okay, thank you. 5% Okay. And so can you, just for illustrative purposes, put on the website or somewhere for the public to see what that looks like? If we could take just a standard neighborhood block and say, if 5%, and I know they're different, so maybe like a fair amount that's kind of, very condensed.
But a typical 50-foot lot neighborhood is going to have, say, 20 homes on that block, and so,
Yeah, that would just be helpful to, I think, kind of let people see what that looks like. Because when you tell me 5%, I'm like, is that 5 houses? Is that 20 houses?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay, so if the city council is okay with us or would like us to move forward with the conditional use permit text amendment, then what we would try to do is time the registration ordinance so that we bring that before you at the same time. We would get that, there's a rough draft of it today, but we would get that draft finalized, posted on the website, again, share with council and property owners and others who are interested, and then bring that forward for city council action. If the city council decides not to amend the zoning ordinance, we would still work on the registration ordinance and bring that forward to you for consideration for the legal short-term rentals that we do have within our mixed-use and commercial districts.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, Gina.
Please excuse me. I'm fading fast. My medication is like, I can't even breathe. But Dana, for people who say, leave the zoning laws alone, just enforce what we're supposed to enforce.
Yep.
How does what you're proposing affect them? What's the response to that plea from the public I'm hearing from?
Certainly. So there's an argument that adding the conditional use permit application option is opening the door a bit, if you will, because there are now two pathways, very similar pathways, but two pathways that a property owner could choose to come forward to the city council for consideration. They could choose to apply for a zoning change that would change their base zoning, again, typically to a PD A5 plus short-term rental, or in some cases, if they're, say, perhaps right next to a mixed-use district, they might ask for a mixed-use zoning change. Or they would have the option of applying for a conditional use permit. So there's an argument that adding that conditional use permit option is adding more pathways, or adding a pathway for short-term rental property owners. And so arguably opening the door a bit.
Even though, is it fair to say CUPs are actually more restrictive because they can be temporary in nature?
That's the tricky part about it, is that, not really that tricky, but that's a detail that's important to point out. Let me go back to that slide to show that. So that second line from the bottom, the conditional use permit can be time limited. So that would be part of the city council's decision and part of the zoning commission's recommendation on whether it should be time limited and what time period, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, and that it can be revoked, so that if there are violations, staff can bring forward that revocation without city council action to initiate that. So the CUP
process, since that's part of the zoning process, the public would have the opportunity to weigh in, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. And just if it's helpful, I know this would predate many of the council members, but prior to COVID, we recommended the conditional use permit option to city council to consider, because we felt it was the right tool for this type of activity.
Thank you. Carlos, did you have a question? Go ahead.
I think this was answered once upon a time, but I can't remember, Dana. Does the cup transfer when a property changes hands?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Melinda. I know the registration wouldn't transfer, but would the conditional use permit transfer? Would the conditional use permit transfer if the property is sold? Yeah, so the conditional use permit could transfer, but the registration for the short-term rental activity would not.
I don't expect that you would know this off the top of your head, but how many cups, not that we're talking about a cup specific to this application, but how many cups across the city do we have currently?
That is a good question.
Yeah. My concern is this.
If it helps you, we have, over 1,000 planned developments.
True.
So
what concerns me a bit is that, given our current resources, we struggle and are stretched to meet the current demands.
Well, I think it
And
depends
adding
on which
to this-
resources you're talking about.
Code compliance, which is the enforcement arm.
Correct.
When it comes to PDs.
Correct,
when
and
it
that's
comes
an
to
issue
cops.
whether, that issue will be somewhat helped by the registration ordinance in terms of the time they need to spend. The conditional use permit shouldn't affect the number of unallowed, illegal short-term rentals that we have, that they have to address.
We received.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, I understand.
Yeah, we haven't had the property owners apply for a zoning change in residential districts to allow short-term rental to this point. So I'm not expecting a deluge of applications for a conditional use permit for short-term rental.
But they can apply.
But if you approved, yes, if you approved a text amendment, then they would have that ability to apply for a conditional use permit. Sorry, Melinda?
I had another question, I guess, in regards to an email we received today from a speaker that has addressed council before on STRs, Jessica Black. She brought up that the city of Waco did something similar for investor-owned STRs in granting cups, but then withdrew it in 2021. Did staff consider the matters that she brought up, the issues that they encountered?
Yes.
When, making this recommendation here?
Yes.
So how are we different?
I think, quite frankly, one of the drivers in Waco is related to the Magnolia project. It generates a lot of traffic to them, and it created some of the issues that they see related to STRs. I'm not saying that's all of it, but that is a lot of the driver of short-term rentals and who has or wants a short-term rental as it relates to the gains and the impact that they've made on the city of Waco. That being said, just to go back to a conditional use permit, I'm not certain of how many conditional use permits we have, but you all have seen a number of conditional use permits as they relate to car washes or other kind of uses. So since its inception in 2018, staff can get you that number of conditional use permits that we have. Some of your existing conditional use permits have time limits on it, and some do not. What we're recommending is, if the council wants to entertain a conditional use permit for short-term rentals, is that they have a definite term. There is already language in the conditional use permit overlay that sets a time. If there is a term that's set for a conditional use permit, that in order to renew it, they have, I believe it's 60 days to start that initiation process of going through the zoning process again. The alternative is that we can look at language to tie the registration to the conditional use permit. So if the registration is not renewed, or if it changes hands because it's not transferable, the staff will then be able to authorize to initiate the removal of the conditional use overlay.
I just want to go on the record. If we're going to do the conditional use permit, I would like to see those options added to the process. The renewal being, the 60-day lag period, and then the renewal being tied to that person. So that way, I think that could help ease some of the fears about these, rogue owners. And so even if the CUP is still in place, they have to register if it's a new person, then would we go back, to be clear, if it's a new person, then would we have to go back through the CUP process?
That would be, initially that's my thought.
Okay. I don't hate that. So, thank you.
Questions, council? Anybody else? Go ahead, Leonard.
Just one other, Dana. So you mentioned you weren't anticipating a deluge of CUP applications.
Right.
So I was a little confused by that. So how many illegal SDRs did we identify this summer? And if those people wanted to become legal, wouldn't they have to file for a CUP, which is a pretty significant number?
Well, and I might need to defer to, since Brandon's here, defer to code and their experience in, particularly prior to this year, in talking with property owners who had short-term rentals. I think some of them make the decision to stop the short-term rental activity. They don't continue it. Or they, stop that and become a, legal short-term, legal rental activity on the site. And so I think that's probably what happens with a number of them. They might, they switch to a 30-day or 6-month or some other term lease so that they're not considered a short-term rental and don't have to go through that zoning change process. So I think that's what happens with most of them. But to answer your question, I believe as of, I think it was June of this year, there were around 630 or so short-term rentals that were addresses that were identified that were outside of, that were in residential districts. Yeah.
Questions,
So
council?
it's not a huge percentage, right? It's not a huge percentage of our
Total housing.
housing stock.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments from council? Go ahead, yeah.
Yes.
I have a question. We talked at one point about the 30 days and lowering it to, the reason I'm asking is, 14 or some other, 30 is an arbitrary, at least from what I understand, but I've had some feedback from folks, Chris Kirk that was at Colonial, he rented a house right around Colonial for that period of time. It wasn't for a month though, it was for less than that. Jenny that came in with the stock show, she wanted to be close to her pig. Talk with her about this, but they couldn't afford to live in a hotel for 3 weeks or so. So what is the rationale for the 30 days?
State law.
State law. State law says we cannot do anything
lodging.
less than 30 days.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah.
State law
State law says
addresses
that.
short-term rentals and
Yes.
says you can't do anything less than 30 days.
Addresses, that is a lodging activity.
Okay, it's a
And-
lodging
and those
activity
that are
for tax
subject-
purposes or for city oversight of cities?
Related to tax purposes.
Tax purposes.
Yes.
That's where the correlation goes.
Yeah.
Okay.
To pay hotel occupancy tax,
So if it's less than 30 days, 29 or more, I'm just trying to clarify.
29 or fewer.
But we're gonna charge taxes here, so
We'll
we're,
collect because they're less than 30 days.
okay. But it could be 14 days.
It could be one day, yes, it could be any number of days that are less than 30.
So that,
Use of
we could
short-term
amend
rental.
that to say less than, 29, 14, we could make, that's what the point I'm trying to get to.
We would find that extremely confusing to say that if you have a short-term rental of, say, 15 days or less, that you're somehow a short-term rental versus some other short-term rental that's, say, 16 to 29 days. I don't know what the benefit of
No,
that
if we
would be.
define it as, that's where I'm trying to get to,
Yeah.
I don't, a real big part of this are people coming to the city and visiting the city.
Yeah,
And wanting them to enjoy the city and understand the
Right,
city, but
and
they may
that's-
not be
that's
able to
the
afford to
tourism
be in a
aspect.
hotel for 3 weeks or 4
Yeah,
weeks.
that's the tourism aspect, right?
Yeah.
That's the tourism goal that we touched on earlier. So when, you may recall from the data mining that the vast majority of stays are 1 day, 2 day, a week. That's the vast majority of stays are short stays. Again, clearly a lodging activity
Yeah,
that would need to pay hotel occupancy tax and is not a residential use.
right. What was the total percentage of, y'all have spent a lot of time, we've spent a lot of time on this. What is the total percentage of houses right now that are registered or we found as STRs?
So again, I might need to check with the data mining company
Yeah.
to see if they have a more current update. But as of June, I believe it was around 600 and some that were not legal and actually, apologize, let me take that back. It was around 630 short-term rentals. I believe of that 630, maybe roughly 65 were in zoning districts where short-term rentals allowed, so mixed-use, commercial. And then the balance, it was around, again, 570, 580 or
It's
so.
like about 1,400 maybe or something, I think, the number I saw.
Well, that was advertisements. So remember, the individual properties advertise on multiple platforms, and they also advertise in multiple ways.
Yeah.
So they might advertise for a partial part of the home, they might advertise for the whole home.
So we don't know for sure. but
So in terms of what they were able to validate, there weren't that many
Yeah.
short-term rental addresses that were operating in June. It was, again, around 600.
Out of I think a total housing stock, at least when you're doing of 377,000 or something,
Right,
less
right.
for more. So it's a very, very, the point I'm getting to
Yes,
is a
it's a s-
very, very
yeah, it's a
small
small
problem.
percentage.
Yes, that I think we've heard from the same 20 people again and again about this very, very small problem. Can you put the slide back up of what we're gonna regulate?
For
And
the
what-
registration?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is what I have a question for you now. For long-term rentals, what's the oversight that we have for them?
So, correct
And
me if I'm-
remember, I'm asking these questions because I represent the TCU area. So we've got a lot of long-term rentals there with TCU students.
Yes.
So I want to know what we regulate there for those long-term rentals.
Certainly. So give me just a minute because it's going to come back to me. So 3 units or more in a dwelling, where it's a multifamily
That's with the
structure.
overlay, though. If
No,
you're
no, no,
not-
no, no, citywide.
Okay.
Citywide, 3 units or more in a dwelling, I believe requires annual registration through the
Okay.
multifamily
No,
registration
I'm just talking about
ordinance.
like a regular house that's a long-term
Yes.
rental.
So a single-family home, I'll let Brandon answer that, but the rules are different within the TCU overlay
I
than
don't
they are
want the TCU
citywide
over, I'm
for
just using
single
that as an
family.
example, but
Okay.
I just want, in the city of Fort Worth,
Yep.
with long-term rentals, single-family residences, what kind of oversight do we have for them?
So in the city of Fort Worth, we do not have single-family rental registration.
Yeah.
So it falls under your typical building and health codes for regulations with a couple of exceptions, and those are generally in zoning. So if single-family zone, as an example, if everybody's related by blood or marriage, you can have more than 5 people. But if they're not, then you're limited to 5 or fewer people. And that's similar to the TCU overlay, where you had the college students getting together and making the dorm.
Yeah.
So what we typically see there, and this also goes to your earlier question, is those are also leases that tend to be greater than 30 days. Most of the time they're 6 or 12 months. So going back, a number of years now, there was a district court action, and it was resolved. This was the city versus someone. It was resolved. And the one ways it was resolved was that you have, in a typical rental situation, when you have a lease of 30 days or greater, that's one type of tenancy under landlord-tenant law. And if it's less than 30 days, it's a different type. So it wasn't just the tax code that was used, but there are other laws on the books, that health and safety laws and others, that we've used for that.
Part of it. Do you think it would be beneficial as part of this that there, with compliance, et cetera, there's, some other oversight, et cetera? I know that this, and I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for one group or another, but I know the Short-Term Rental Alliance has said they'd love to play a part in some sort of education piece, et cetera, as if we go down this road. Is there benefit to you as a department that they are involved?
I can't say. I haven't, there's not enough time to speak to that, to actually think about the
Perfect
ins and
answer.
outs. Yeah.
Because what I want to say right now is, I think while y'all have looked at it, et cetera, I think there's too much uncertainty. The court cases we're still getting, everything else that's going out, for us to move forward with this. At this point, I think staying where we have at this point and just moving forward that way is probably, I don't think, from the emails I've gotten from all the sides, no one's happy with this. And probably that's the best way to do public policy, when no one's happy with the outcome, right? But there's still a lot of unsettlement. I don't know that we have done the best job here of balancing neighborhood and keeping neighborhoods, the sanctity of neighborhoods, but also preserving private property rights. I don't know that this is the best path forward. So I think there's probably still more work to do on it. And I really appreciate y'all's time. Again, this is a problem that is a very, very small problem. Again, we've heard from the same 20 people again and again and again ad nauseum, but I'm not sure this is the perfect answer. That's all I have.
Carlos?
Dana, unscientifically so, just in passing in the hall, I had asked some months ago, trend-wise, what have we seen in terms of areas that have exhibited known increases in STRs?
The stockyards.
Right.
Because of
And I have a
murality and the
handful that I've
popularity.
seen myself that have occurred because I've received complaints about them. And again, it's depending on the area, depending on the attraction near said area, is where you're gonna see, I think, some differing numbers. I know of one, just a couple of blocks away from me, the owner's in California. They've been cautioned before on violations, and they have an active, violation open right now. Several months in the works.
Yeah.
And I'm still getting complaints about it, so. Anyways.
Jared,
just
did you have
my
a
point, yeah.
question? Sorry, you came on and then you disappeared. Kind of looked like an angel. It's all white behind you. Yeah, okay.
Oh, I'm okay, thank you.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, Gina, did you have anything? She may have gone off. Okay, so it sounds like the question for council and to give staff guidance is, do we want to pursue any change to the current ordinance and look at this CUP process which essentially would get initiated via zoning, then back to us sometime in the spring or early, I guess, early winter, or late winter, I should say? Or where are we going with this? What do y'all want staff to do? Michael's already expressed his opinion.
Yeah, I'm actually in agreement of moving forward with the CUP option.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Carlos?
I'm for, and I'll echo some of what Michael said before. I think this is not ready. I see a lot of problems with this, historical problems that we have presently. Some for keeping the current ordinance, prohibiting it from residential areas, but imposing the hot tax where we do allow it.
Alan?
Do we actually do the hot tax right now?
So we don't have the registration ordinance in place for short-term rentals, and so we want to bring that forward so that we can collect the hot tax from the legal short-term rentals. So we would like to move forward with bringing forward the registration
And we
ordinance.
could do that separately.
That would be
We gotta work through the
separate,
rest of
yes.
it, but no one has an issue
Totally.
with the registration of legal short-term rentals, I'm assuming here, correct?
No,
So
no. But
we-
the only thing I would say to that is that there will be a change being made to
The ordinance is
the ordinance with the registration. So
But just registration, not zoning,
I got that.
necessarily, yeah.
I got that. But what because what we're saying is either we're making the change or we're not making a change. But we
Two
will
different-
make, right, I know two different
Okay,
things.
sorry.
But we will make a change because we're gonna add that registration to add the hot tax.
That's a good point. That's
Okay.
right, yep.
Okay. Alan? That was good, thank you.
So I don't like that we're keeping everybody in limbo while we're trying to figure out what we want to do. I don't think that's helpful to anybody. I completely get the concerns that Michael's raised and that Carlos has raised. And I'll to an extent echo those, that we want to make sure we get it right. But I do think we need to continue forward with our, while we're doing that with our existing rules.
Ordinance. So you would just like to keep our current ordinance in place and not pursue a CUP change right now?
No, I think CUP is the right answer, but I do defer to my council members that want to make sure that we get it right. I'm willing to give them some time for discussion if they want to do that.
Okay. Elizabeth?
I'm okay with moving forward with discussion of adding that CUP to the process. I think that I would ask, just based on the emails that I've gotten, that staff work to really emphasize that a CUP is just like a zoning change. It's actually a little more restrictive. So to the extent, because I think there's this idea of, well, we're expanding it to allow into residential areas, which technically we are. However, I want everyone hearing this because I know they're watching because they're emailing me as they're watching. You still have to lobby your council person and other
And the
members.
neighborhood.
Yeah, and the neighborhood and other members of council to have the CUP approved. And so in the same way that neighborhoods can rally to stop whatever or support whatever zoning change, they still have that ability to do so. And so really, we are giving a lot of control to the residents by allowing the by instituting a CUP process.
Yeah. Gina, go ahead.
Just going to speak the voice of my constituents. I think we need to keep the ordinance in place as we have it, enforce it. I fully understand the benefits of a CUP, but the public in general does not. And so for now, you'll just find me in the minority of saying, leave it alone, enforce what we have.
Thanks, Gina. Anybody else want to add to the conversation?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Leonard.
Yeah, sure. I'm in the camp with Gina there. Just as this CUP idea has come out, we've gotten another wave of emails. And they're definitely not the same 20 people. I mean, there's a lot of folks, given Dickey's and the Cultural District, there's, just a lot of people engaged on this topic. So I would vote to just keep it as it is.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask this question. Even though we know a CUP is actually more restrictive than the current zoning, does that bother anybody? Knowing there's miscommunication and knowing there's a lot needed to tell people, technically, if we don't do anything, it's less restrictive for the neighborhoods that may be emailing you right now. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah,
Go
I'll
ahead.
weigh in on that. What the public, for the years I've been on the council, the public doesn't like the heavy hand of an all-knowing council without input from those people we represent. And we have to make efforts to bring the public along. And I don't see any harm in a delay to make sure people understand the power and the benefit of a CUP. But it's all about communication and people feeling as if they've been heard. And I don't like the idea of, I know best, I'm the council person. And whether that's perception, and I'm aware of that. But just know that I'm very concerned about how the public feels. We're listening to them. And like Leonard, I hear more than from 20 people, I can assure you.
So in this situation, go ahead, Chris.
I would
please.
just add to that and to what you're saying. Is this an opportunity that we want to have a actual hearing on whether, if we describe what CUP will do and what it actually is, sit in the hearing like we did in redistricting, give everybody an opportunity to come and how all of us wrote our notes, and then we make a decision on whether we move forward or do a CUP to give them an opportunity to give their opinion. I mean, because we all have heard, but maybe all of us have not heard collectively what everybody is saying, and which this being a hot topic. I don't think just a vote now to stop it should end it.
Carlos.
Just one comment, well, maybe it's more of an observation, and some on staff will remember this. My predecessor went through a tremendous amount of effort to go around the neighborhoods in the North Side area and perform a council-initiated zoning change to make sure that the neighborhoods were under the same type of zoning, being residential, because it was a patchwork being an older part of town over time that had gotten unmanageable. So a lot of public input meetings went into that effort, and everyone agreed that they wanted to remain residential. Now, if we introduce this, and I'm speaking more specifically to the example that I just provided, to me that would seem to go somewhat against the grain from a zoning change, perspective. Again, with the expectation that you have, live, own property that is single-family residential in these council-initiated rezoning areas. So again, that's something to consider. I know Arlington Heights had some effort as well when Dennis Shingleton was in the seat that went through a similar council-initiated rezoning. And again, given to where the location is, I'm just voicing the input that I've received overwhelmingly. Residents do not want this, even with cups. And I can attest to this, and some of them are sophisticated, they know how cups work. But again, I caution the council that from an administrative standpoint, this seems manageable, us talking about it, having an intellectual conversation, but I have my serious doubts that we can do it.
Well, all due respect, I think that is a good analogy that District 2 did what they did in the past. But we do know that District 2 does not represent the entire city of Fort Worth. And so with District 8 being on the south side, people want an opportunity to do short-term rentals. And so I think it is beneficial, and it does not go against the grain to have a public forum to allow people, well, we're going to have a public forum tonight. If you look at all the speaker cards that come to talk about STRs. So I think this topic is huge, it's big, and this is a new council. It's not 10, 12 years ago. The city of Fort Worth is different, it's been innovative, and we have a lot of things that are coming to the city of Fort Worth. And STRs is not gonna go away. So I do believe, and I stand by what I said, that we should do a hearing session on this to get the voices and hear them all at one time, instead of in different silos.
I hear you, Chris, but I think you misunderstood what I said. Specifically, I said that it was only to District 2's example. I did not say that I was against your suggestion.
Okay.
Dana, you mentioned earlier I think it's kind of maybe a new phenomenon of STRs in multifamily buildings. What have you heard there, learned there, and how do we interpret that and, project out what that might mean?
Certainly. So we have not visited, if you will, the sites that we understand that are legal. We've just looked up the zoning to confirm that they could be legal within mixed-use districts. And so Our assumption is that of the 65 or so legal short-term rentals, that a lot of those are likely in multifamily structures, whether it's a condominium building or a regular multifamily rental building or mixed-use building. So one of the things we had assumed was that there may be tenants who were performing or advertising and having short-term rental activity in their units, perhaps without the landlord's consent, the multifamily building owner's consent. There was an article recently that Airbnb is reaching out or has evidently worked with some national multifamily property owners to maybe make it a little bit easier for tenants regular residential tenants in multifamily buildings to get their property owner's consent to register and have that short-term rental activity in those dwelling units. So I don't yet know what that means for Fort Worth. Again, one thing it means to me is that it makes it more important that we have a registration ordinance so that, again, particularly in our mixed-use districts or, say downtown or near downtown districts or other districts where the short-term rental use is allowed today, that given one of our goals, we want to support tourism, but we also want to balance our housing stock and our affordable housing stock, that I think it's important that we make sure that where that short-term rental activity is occurring, that there aren't parties and gatherings and that use, even though it's legal under zoning, that it doesn't become a nuisance to the neighbors in those areas. And then similarly, if at some point City Council wanted to consider allowing conditional use permits, say in multifamily zoning districts, not, they're already allowed in mixed use, but say in C or D or UR multifamily zoning, that again, we'd want to look at those density restrictions, I think as we've proposed, and then again, I think it's important that we have that registration ordinance so that there's that protection for both the residents, the visitors, the city.
Yeah, at some point, if developers are working with, say, Airbnb to specifically develop properties for this purpose, except for the amenities, they're virtually hotels.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And so again, under today's zoning ordinance, in order to have an entire building that might be used for lodging, you would need to be in, again, the commercial or mixed use or even industrial zoning where lodging is allowed by right.
And I guess, we've got to be conscientious of our existing hoteliers here, right? And if we go down this path, what does that do for the city to attract more investment from an economic standpoint,
right,
economic development standpoint from hotel operators?
Right.
It would certainly, you could argue, have a very negative consequence.
Be very interesting to, see how that plays out.
Yeah.
So based on my polling here, feels like there's consensus not to pursue a CUP process right now, to keep the ordinance as it is right now, with the exception of moving forward with requiring a registration for STR use. And by doing so, it also helps us maybe during this next legislative session, because we never know what the state of Texas may look at doing on STRs across the state as well. And so the ordinance would stay as is. And then for any STR that's currently in place, their only mechanism to be a legal use would be a normal zoning process change that everybody is familiar with. Am I summarizing that correctly, council? Yes, go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, for me, that's exactly the way I see things right now. And I think at some future point, when we work with the legislature and TJ and we have a real good grasp of what's on the horizon, we could make some changes. But I just think any changes that come really need to be with a current citizenry educated by the process of a public hearing. So leaving it alone right now will put people at ease.
Any other comments or questions, council? Okay.
So just real quickly, in terms of next steps, we'll work on drafting that ordinance but get it out to the registration ordinance, to be clear, the registration ordinance, to get that out and to give sufficient time over the holidays and perhaps a little bit beyond for folks to look at that and react, provide questions or comments to staff, and then bring that forward to council for action. So guessing late January or early February, depending on how that works out. But
Just
ahead,
for
Lynn.
clarity, for those listening, if you could describe it one more time.
Sure.
Where we landed. that'd be
Sounds
great.
like where we landed is the only change, the current ordinance as it is, would be a requirement of registration for legal STR use. And so staff's going to work on the registration ordinance and for us to come forward in January or February. Other than that, the ordinance as written stays the same. So there's some familiarity in the public, and there has not been consensus to pursue a CUP process of a majority of council members, so we're not going to pursue that right now.
And I do have a question to add. As it relates to regulating, we will only regulate the ones that are in violation.
so zoning violations.
Zoning violation.
Zoning violations where there's a complaint, and whether there's a nuisance or not. So we'd go back to the way we have been enforcing.
Right, so
Yeah.
that was a big question, so
Yes,
they
we
need,
get
it needs
to
to be clear
resolve
that that
issue.
part still stay the same too.
Right.
So, because some people just complaining.
So, yeah, so.
Yeah, just, what we would do if this moves forward as summarized is we would send out, we wouldn't start our investigations over on the ones that we've already got a complaint on and investigated. We would send a letter out to all of those owners and operators to let them know that the ordinance has made a minor change, that if you're legal, you have to register, everything else remains the same. And then we would give them probably 30 days to correct any deficiencies. And what I mean by that is, what we don't want to do is there's probably some STRs out there that have booked people, like right now for the holidays. This, of course, would happen afterwards. So we don't want people that have already booked to be the victim in this. We want them to be able to come to Fort Worth, enjoy Fort Worth, but we also know it can't be perpetual. So we'll put everybody on notice that if you're illegal, you're illegal, and that we will enforce the ordinance as we had in the past and move forward. I will say, just on a complaint basis, that I think maybe this speaks to Councilmember Firestone's concern or question and that of Mr. Crane's, because I really thought about that question and the complexity of it, is we don't get, most of our complaints that we receive are not because of nuisance. Like, the nuisance will come from the police and others. Most of the time, it's because of the character of the property, the way in which it's being operated is different from that of other single-family homes or other condominiums that, you know, you get used to. It doesn't matter whether it's owner-occupied or tenant-occupied. You get used to having this, and where you live, you want that to be the most consistent and safest place. And that's how we are built as a culture. And when you start having people that live next door that are different every weekend, they're young, they're old, right? Some are noisy, some are quiet, and they have different cars. And so it starts upsetting people's peace and comfort in their neighborhood, the places where they want to feel the safest. You know, you take a child to a hotel and you're very careful about where that child goes, but your own child in your own home in your own neighborhood, you may not be as careful, right? So really, when you look at this from a complaint basis, really the majority of the complaints we get are more about that type of quality of life concern and asking us to do it. So that's one of the reasons why we have some neighborhood folks that are frustrated about us only enforcing this at the nuisance level, because to them it is a nuisance. It is disturbing their peace, their safety, enjoyment of their home. So I just wanted to add that just in case it helps with, you know, further conversations with folks. Right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Brandon, for that clarification.
Okay.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Dana and Melinda and team.
Thank
Appreciate
all.
you.
Appreciate it.
Council, that's the last of our presentations today. I'll move to future agenda items if there are any, and I do remind you, we're going to move straight into CCPD. Elizabeth.
All right, I've got a bunch. PD related, it's been a while since we had a 911 staffing update, and so I'd just like to get an update on where we are for, you know, complete staffing and what the call volume is looking like and our response times on those. I'd also like a status update of the technology contract rollout that we had, specifically where we are, like what pieces of technology have rolled out, and if they're, as a result of including that in our operations, if there's any changes that have been made to our general policies or procedures as part of that. and comprehensive list of all of our current tax abatements through economic development. And then also progress toward the agreement requirements, whether that be, construction dollars spent or number of jobs added to the area. I'd also like staff to look at our tax abatement policy. One thing I noticed in the IRs is that one of them had a requirement that the employees for that particular entity be, there was a geographic requirement that they be Central City, Fort Worth folks. And so I want to know if that's something that we can build into our policy from a legal perspective to make sure that we're giving first preference to the people that, and the best jobs coming here to the people that already live here. And then we start working out. Last but not least, TAD. We all get emails about TAD. We all get complaints about TAD. And I think it would be very helpful for me if we could get an IR on what the city of Fort Worth's roles, responsibilities, ability to perform oversight with that particular entity are, so that we can effectively communicate that to our residents.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Leonard and Chris, go ahead both.
I would just like to add to the contract with the police. So I think we agreed when we was in separate meetings that they will come back and give us an update on the license plate readers, how many was read, and what was the finding. So I want to add that to Councilwoman Beck's IR, that we actually get some breakdowns of what has happened. And then I only have one. I would like to see a report of all the CPIs that have taken place since January 21 to current. And if possible, if we're able to give exact findings of that CPIs, and those that we can't, I'm fine with that.
Leonard?
Thanks. For a future agenda item is regarding the residential permit parking program. So it's become more difficult for residents in the Arlington Heights area to obtain parking passes. When the program began, the office that distributed the parking passes was in the Western Heritage Garage. Now apparently the office is downtown, and this is making it more difficult to obtain the parking passes, and residents have to pay to park to pick up their passes. Additionally, would the city be able to consider a mail system where the residents in these residential parking permit areas would be able to request their passes by mail, especially if it's a renewal, and not have to go to the location to pick it up as a new resident pass? And what is the process for appeals when the citizens are issued a citation because their parking pass has expired? And lastly, a request for an IR to the future, this to further explain this process and answer these questions, if we could get that detail.
Thanks, Leonard.
Thank you.
Any other questions, future agenda items, council? Carlos?
Sorry, I have a couple. The first is really a follow-up on an IR that I requested October 18th from PD on the decibel meter readers. I know Chief Aldridge has provided me with some partial information, but I'm still waiting for the rest. So whenever that becomes available. Then community engagement. I'd like to know what the current status of that department is, how many community engagement meetings they've attended in the past several months, 6 to 12 months, and staff availability to sufficiently cover, those meetings.
Thanks, Carlos. Gina?
Carlos just took one of mine with community engagement, so just know that he's not the only one concerned. I've got 3 of them. One thing I'd like is to get a report from police. I'm concerned about crime around the dollar stores, whether it's Dollar Tree, Family Dollar, Dollar General. A couple of weeks ago, I had asked PD to consider having officers take breaks around those locations. And within a few days after my request, we had a homicide in Dallas, maybe 2 around Family Dollars. So I'm concerned about those stores. The workers are not allowed to bring any type of defense tools to work with them, and it makes them very vulnerable. The other thing that I'd like is a report on I used to ask for the top 3, now I want to ask for the top 4 positions in every department. I'm looking at diversity and to see how we're feeding that pipeline to management. And so I'd like to know the stats on the director, assistant director, and the next 2 people, because that 4th person is the one who you want to try to get pushed up. And I'm looking for diversity there. The other thing I'd like to tag on to Elizabeth's on the tax abatements, I'd like to include the average salary that these companies are paying our people. We've made some improvement. It used to be like in the 40s. I think we're at the 60s and 70s. But if she doesn't object to it, I'd like to make sure that that includes wages too, in terms of what they're paying. And I think that's all.
Thanks, Gina. Dr. Williams, anything from you on future agenda items? No? Okay.
The one from earlier regarding if the 911, or I'm sorry, oh my God, I'm losing the word. I'm gonna need Chief Aldridge to come back and give me the technical term for those press buttons in our early learning
Panic button.
centers.
Panic button.
Panic button. That's it. Sorry about that, y'all. I'd like to, have that on the IR to see if CCPD can possibly fund that.
Thank you. Any other items? Nope. I've got just one, also for PD, is to have Chief Noakes, in one of our first meetings in January, the next work session would be then, is to bring forward the Policy Advisory Board, and walk through with us what his recommendations are going to be. Any other items, council? Okay. Yeah, it would definitely, more than an IR, it needs to be a report. Agreed. Okay, any other items? I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and then I'm going to hand this to Carlos. Whatever we need to do to convert meetings.